Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have liftoff.
Welcome back to the Launch Box. In today's episode, we're joined by the incredible Bola Sol. Bola is a financial advisor and author. She is so passionate about helping people take control of their money and mindset. And today, she's here to share her insights on financial empowerment, building wealth, and the importance of financial confidence. Please welcome to the podcast, Bola Sol. Just a quick one before we start. If you like listening to this episode, which I know you're going to, please like it and subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to share it to your group chat. Well, welcome.
Hey.
Thank you very much for coming and talking to us. I think the best place to start is breaking it down, exactly what you do, Bola, and how that looks, because you're a financial advisor.
Yeah.
I think there's that confusion between a financial advisor and an accountant,
Yes.
which is really interesting. Tell me what your job role actually means.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.
I would say with a financial advisor, we help people look after their investments. So we call it assets under management, and we may have a starting figure. So somebody could come to me and say, for example, someone's left me an inheritance and I now have so much more money than I know what to do with. You know, you might know what to do with your paycheck every month, but what do you do if maybe someone's left you £300,000? That's when a financial advisor could come in. It could be a lot less than that, by the way, but the whole point is we come in, we assess your attitude to risk, your capacity for loss, and then we will put together a presentation of what we think we should invest in on your behalf. And then that's what we'll do. And maybe we'll have meetings once or twice a year, catch ups, and be like, this is where your money is now, and this is how your money's growing. What's interesting is if we work with someone like that, we tend to ask, oh, do you have an accountant? Who's your accountant? And then we ask, can we get in touch with them? Because we also want to make sure that you are being tax efficient. So of course, that's what we have to do, but we just want to make sure that everything's aligned so they can work together.
Yeah, so different, but they coexist.
Yeah, exactly,
Yes.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
We've all just paid our taxes. And I see it so much in my industry with like friends and people that I work with that we're like, gosh, I've got to get everything sorted because I've got to get tax return in. And it's like the moment that everybody goes, it really is. And we know it happens every year. We know it's coming. We don't get any better at organising for the year ahead. It's just how it works, right? If we're at the time, and we're probably all having the same conversation now where we're like, next year, I'm going to be ahead of this.
Yeah.
Next year, I'm going to be my best self when it comes to my taxes. What's the best thing that we could do now to make the process smoother for next year?
Ooh, I'd say get on top of your organisation and documentation of everything.
Right.
One of the things I used to do in the past is leave everything to the last minute, and then my accountant's like, hi, can I see everything? And then I have like hypertension for 3 days.
It's like the anxiety of that phone call.
so
Of the, like,
much.
have you kept the receipts? Have you done the thing?
Yeah.
No.
And it feels like school because like, what's this for? What's that for? What's this for? And you're like, this is for that, that's for that.
Yes.
However, once you stay on top of things, week by week, month by month. So for example, if you get income coming in, the company should usually send you like a remittance advice slip. And what you can do with that is essentially just keep it. So I'm with Starling Bank and I attach everything to that transaction. So money comes in and I'm like, okay, great. Here's all the documentation that shows and proves I've worked with this company. Or if I have an expense, I'm like, great, here's the receipt that shows that. The key is stay on top of that as often as possible. Don't wait till the end, because it can give you more calm, if you will, as opposed to just wait until the end. And also, maybe halfway through the tax year, speak to your accountant and just ask like, hi, where am I? What are things looking like? It's okay to have that conversation. And I think a lot of people don't know that. Yeah.
Because it's probably that conversation we all put off.
Yeah.
Because also, like, if your accountant's going to call you, or it's always for something like this that feels like the thing that you're going to put off until you have to.
It feels like they're stealing your joy.
It does.
Like you're going to have an amount and they're going to go, no, it's double that. And you're going to be like, going to go cry now.
And it's the way that we all talk about it. It's like, oh, I've got to do this for the tax man. I mean, I don't even know who the elusive man or woman is, but we'll say he's a man. And it does fill us with that dread. So are there like apps and places that kind of simplify that for us. So we're in such a modern world that everything's online, everything's tech.
Yeah.
The idea of like saving a receipt seems quite archaic now. And
weird,
I know it is important, but it doesn't kind of, in this like making life more convenient era that we're in, which we love.
We love it.
Holding on to a paper receipt is counterproductive.
Yeah, and you could easily lose it. So with some apps, you can add attachment and then you can add your receipt, just take a picture of it. However, there are apps like OneTap. Because I have like an Amex business card, I can't do that in the Amex app, I don't believe. So I use OneTap and take a picture of those receipts and add it there. There's also like Dext. So there's a few services, QuickBooks and things like that, where you can, and Xero, where you can kind of attach things directly so that it syncs for you, because you don't want to do that heavy lifting on your own.
No.
You want to feel like, okay, this is sorted. I don't have to think about that. So wherever possible, I do think that there's things that you can allow it to like sync across, and those are some of the apps that help.
Okay, that's interesting. Let's talk about launching a business, because obviously the tax thing, like you say, we've got to all get better at the preparation, and you know it's timely because that's where we are now. But the whole kind of ethos of this podcast is launching, right? And ladies looking to launch, have launched, the stories about the journey across the way. When it comes to finances and I suppose someone looking to launch a business right now, what do you think are some of the most important first steps when it comes to finances that they could kind of start with on day one before? Because when you are launching a business, the initial, without investment, which we know is very hard for women. We discuss the gap a lot, and the 2% number that flies around is actually way too stark. It can be hand to mouth at the start. It's very kind of, unless you've been conscious and you've thought, I'm going to do this extra job to save that pool of money to execute this idea, it is hand to mouth at the start. What would be your kind of like steps that they could take from day one?
I'd say from day one, ask yourself if you want to be a sole trader or if you want to set up a limited company. Okay. And the reason that's so important is because you have to think about limited liability. So let's say, for example, you choose being a sole trader and maybe you have corporation tax, maybe it's higher than you thought. You are personally liable for that. Whereas having a company, limited liability, it essentially kind of means you're very separate from your company. So it's two different entities. But once you're a sole trader, let's say you decide you don't want to set that up, then you always have to attach it to everything you've built personally.
Yes. So you are, by setting up a limited company, you are adding a layer of protection to yourself and your assets.
Exactly. And separating like you from your business just in a legal format, whereas like you and your business are a lot closer if you're a sole trader, if that makes sense.
And do you know what's so interesting? Because of I was telling you before how I actually am, for somebody that runs businesses, has businesses, I am, the finances and that part of my brain is something that I've really struggled to tap into. I've become very conscious of it, and you know, I know how to stick to a budget, or whether that happens or not. But I am quite incompetent when it comes to that. And I remember at the time, I'm fortunate enough to have an accountant who's great and who advises me. However, I remember when I launched my business, I'm saying, no, this is mine. I want like everybody to know this is my baby and I'm doing it myself and this is my business. And him really educating me on, okay, but when something happens, because I'm not saying it will, but if it did, the liability is on you. So and I really didn't understand. I found that I don't know why, I found that really hard to process. I'm like, no, I don't get it. But actually having that layer of protection is so, so important.
Yeah, because it just means that whatever happens in your life, especially, you're a family woman, it's just so different for you. Like, you don't actually want it to interfere with your personal life in that way. You want to love your business, but love it from afar.
Yes. Yeah. It's really, really good advice, and something that I think the quicker you get your head around that, the better, you say at the start.
Yeah. And also opening a business bank account. So for example, I think sometimes even bookkeeping can become incredibly messy if you are jumping between like your personal and business account.
Yes.
Or you're saying, oh no, I've got some work expenses here, and you've taken it from your personal account, and then, you know, bookkeeping is now in 2 different places and so on. And I just think it's so important that people separate that as soon as possible, because some people don't, and then it's harder for anyone who is looking over your accounts in the months to come, for example.
In the future. And I think that is one thing that is really hard with small businesses when they start. You know, I've got a friend very close to me that actually, you know, she makes clothes and she's got a beautiful brand, but she didn't expect the growth to be as quick. So so fulfilling things like orders, and, you know, that's one side of it. But actually, I was sat down with her, which is kind of laughable that it was me that was doing that, but now I feel like I've got an experience, you know, and I've got that experience behind me. But sitting down and saying, okay, so this product here, that first run of dresses, how much did that cost you?
Yeah.
But when it was exactly that, so hand to mouth, that we couldn't then, it was so hard to track what she'd spent on, you know, to bring certain things to market, because it was so much in the personal.
Yeah. It could even be something like, oh, she's done so many parts of it through her business, and then she's gone to post it and she spent money on her personal account. It's the small things like that. And I used to do that, and I'd be like, oh, it's only £4 in the post office. But then it starts to add up, and then once you end up paying tax, you're like, what difference could that £4
Yeah, no, of course.
It ends up,
of course.
yeah. So you just have to be accountable for yourself as well, because you want to keep your money. And every time you kind of put things down personally, sometimes you can even forget to add it up. And I've done that in the past. And that's when I stopped, because I was just like, you are missing out on tax deductibles because you're not separating this properly. So just don't do it anymore.
Yeah. And I think which again comes back to that sort of self-discipline. Yeah. So you really kind of like those odd, meeting a client or going for a coffee, those odd things that are like, it's £10, it's £4. It doesn't seem like a lot at the start. Yeah. But always going to amount.
Yeah, sometimes I meet with friends, and it could be like a business meeting, and I'm literally hovering over like the contact list for a second, and they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, is this a personal, is this a business? And I'm like, this is a business meeting. And I'm like, all right, tap this card.
Yes.
Because you're constantly chopping and changing. Where am I? What am I doing? What is this for? And so on.
And it's so kind of, when you, like you say, when you live life like that, it is so easy to just be like, oh, it was just a coffee, and you're on to the next thing. Yeah. But actually, the hovering over the contact list is very smart.
It's so important.
Takes a second,
but it's so key, because I'd rather do that and hover for like a couple seconds than have to go back later, and my accountant's like, is that all your expenses? And I'm like, oh no, wait, this time I had some coffees on here, let me go to that and go to that account as well.
And I think when you're looking at like keeping your accounts in one place for any future possible investment or kind of people looking to help you or prop up the cash flow, everybody needs a clear sort of foresight of everything. What do you think would be one of the biggest sort of financial mistakes people make when starting out a business?
I would say not thinking about the accountant they choose. I have friends who have Googled accountancy services and picked the top one, which there's nothing wrong with that. But I also think it's good to have reviews and know your why, and know your why may be very, very different from someone else's. So if I was starting a clothes brand, I might speak to people I know who have clothes brands already and ask, hey, who's your accountant, because of the type of business it is, versus maybe somebody who has a service-based business. And I also think that people need to think, how often is your accountant communicating with you? Because what happens is, when I've had the best accountants, it's the ones that are constantly keeping me on top of things. The worst accountant I've had is the one where it's like, I'm messaging him and I'm like, hi, is everything okay? Because you don't know what's going on. And I've know a lot of people who their accountants have really messed them up financially. So as a result, they're like, oh my gosh, this money's not mine. I have to give more of it because they didn't tell me about this and they didn't tell me about that. And you know, you can feel like, oh great, I made this much profit. And then maybe you get someone else to check your money and they're like, actually you didn't, you need to take more out, or did you consider this and did you consider that? So I think it's just key that people don't just think, oh, let's just go with that accountant, or that works for you. You have to make sure it works for you. You're happy with the communication? Do you feel like everything is above board? Because sometimes I have heard a lot of accountants don't have good communication.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to everything, doesn't it? We see that so much in in business that communication is key, and
So
if it
key.
isn't there, whether that's a supplier, whether that's an accountant,
Yeah.
whether that is, it's always gonna sort of cause tension across a relationship, isn't it? It's so interesting you talk about having an accountant, because when you're budgeting and you say like you have saved up a pot of money that you're going to take this venture and you've got this product that you want to bring to market, what is interesting is I don't think people actually account for an accountant in that budget.
That's true.
So I think maybe that's also a mindset shift, because we look at, okay, how do we bring this here? It's something that an accountant is thought of later on,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
So like, I think, which is fair, because when you're starting, you don't have the finances to have a team.
Yeah.
Or would you we talk about spending money in marketing, we talk about the web developer, we talk about putting money in different places, but would you really prioritise an accountant from the jump in that initial budget?
No, not from the jump. Maybe after the first 6 to 9 months, I'd then start shopping around for an accountant and things like that.
Right,
But
okay. Why do you say that?
Because you don't need an accountant straight away once you start a business and so on. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really important that you give it a second, essentially, because there's nothing to report yet.
Yes.
So it's just about waiting until that period does
Okay,
start.
fine. So
yeah.
the first sort of 6 to 9 months,
Yeah.
and then see how
Yeah.
that looks. So in those first 6 to 9 months, what would you say, apart from the organisation and having everything streamlined, which I think is such a valuable piece of advice, that actually you should you should look to have a business account initially. What would your kind of must-haves be to start a business without an accountant, without maybe a financial background or expertise? What would you say should be the kind of do's and don'ts?
Oh, make sure you have an emergency fund. So within your business, like 3 to 6 months of expenses, even if that includes maybe paying yourself, because I know some people, they're bootstrapping, they're doing it alongside having a day job. But some people, they're like, I'm going all in and stuff like that. And people can have really exciting months where they're like, oh my gosh, I made this much money. And what I find happens to people psychologically is they start thinking that they're going to make that same amount of money every single month.
Yes.
So then they're like, oh my gosh, I made 20K this month. And then maybe another month they make 35K. But then the economy can change. So many things can change. And they're like, where is this money gone? So when that money does come and it does do well, just start putting some money away for some basic expenses for your business. Again, if that includes salary for yourself, because if you do hit hard times, you don't want to feel like you didn't prepare for that. And maybe you were reinvesting so much into the business that you didn't think about how the business would survive.
Yes.
In times of like change.
Yeah. Okay. Emergency fund.
Yeah. This emergency fund. Yeah. I've like had people argue with me about that. But luckily accountants came to my defense, because I said once that if you're an entrepreneur, maybe you're making over £15,000 a month. And I said that because we're in the age of influencers and content creators. People are making a lot of money.
Well, you're talking hypothetically too, right?
Yeah. And some people were like, oh, that's not a good idea to have an emergency fund. And accountants were like, everyone needs an emergency fund. I know of someone who runs a hedge fund and they're like in their 50s and they didn't have an emergency fund. Everybody needs one, because if something does happen, you want to have that buffer.
Well, nobody knows what's around the corner in life, right? I think it's never, if you can afford every outgoing and every thing that you need to make your life operate, and you've got the luxury of having an emergency fund, it's like, why wouldn't you?
Literally that. And it just feels so much better. There's been times, I think the pandemic is a fantastic example.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? I think we saw so many news reports where it's like companies don't have 3 months of cash flow, and maybe they were operating on footfall depending on the type of business, and then that's when you want to say, oh, we've got some reserves and stuff like that. So
Okay, emergency fund always. We touched on apps before and how there's a lot of ways now to simplify things, to make it easy, to make it convenient, to kind of move smart with your money. What are some more kind of simple habits, hacks that people can implement today to keep better track of their money?
So first one, I'd say no matter what, just take a picture of a receipt. And if you just have a folder, just keep it there. Because if anything does happen, you just want to say that you actually have a copy of that somewhere. Because at times we don't go into the app on time. So I'd definitely say that's one. And just have your own like filing system. Although a lot of these apps are supposed to work, sometimes they don't, or they have like a 90-day period where they will connect and then you have to reconnect.
Right.
So maybe if you've got an email and you're not up to date and you don't have the reminders, you might think, oh yeah, it's tracking everything, and it's not. So I'd always say maybe have a manual backup as well, just in case. And you don't have to think about it too much. It's just, add it to this file, or just take a picture of the receipt and just do that. That way you're just up to date. You don't have to think about everything now, but it takes some of the pain away.
Yeah, exactly. It's always sort of keeping your own records and not as much as good as the apps are, not relying on technology.
Yeah, because I've done that sometimes and I'm like, would you mean it stopped syncing?
It can't.
Literally.
Is there one financial habit that you swear by that we should be doing, that we get so caught up in the day-to-day outgoings and then you're on to the next month, and then saving for obvious things that, might be something that feels important to you in your lifestyle, like let's get to this moment and then we can have a holiday, or that I think that we then don't think bigger picture.
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say saving and investing, I make sure that that's something I do every single month. And I think it's easy to save for like an emergency fund, even those 3 to 6 months of expenses, and you want to buy a home or you want to go on holiday, sure. But also investing. Now, something that's really important for people to know is that because of inflation, we need to keep inflation to 2%, right? So that's like the base rate. And that's what the Bank of England does. They try to keep inflation to 2%. If you're getting 5% on your savings, the real rate of return is 3%, because it's 5 minus 2. If savings rates now go down to 1% and inflation is 2%, you're not really making any money. Wow. And that's why I tell people that you need to push past saving alone. You need to invest. And that's the whole point, that you are getting a higher return. Let's say it's 7% or 10% if you invest in like index funds, which is a pool of different companies, for example, or exchange traded funds, which is a pool of different companies. Then the hope is maybe on average, if you return 10 or 11% and inflation's 2%, you still got 9 in a year that you've made. Whereas savings can't always compete with that. So I always say it's so important that like you allow your money to work hard for you, and also let it compound, because if you put away a certain amount of money and then you invest more and more and just add it up, that becomes more money on top and it compounds. And then one day you look back and you're like, okay, great, I'm in a good position now, and maybe I'm going to add more. Some people withdraw it for reasons. When I bought my first property, I think I took a heap out of my stocks and shares ISA of like investing, and that's because it compounded, and I left it in there for a few years. So I just say like, I swear by saving and investing.
Okay. I like that. And it's like you say, like, work smarter, not harder.
Yeah. Especially in the future. Sometimes I always think about, what do I want to be doing in 30 years? Where do I want to be? And what will my money look like? And essentially, what do I need to do now to make sure my money looks good then? And that's when I'm like, you've got to work smarter. You don't want to feel like the only time you are making money is when you're working hard for it or when you're present somewhere. And that's the whole point of investing. Now, of course, that's traditional investing. You can invest through businesses, of course, like that. And, but it's just so important that you think, how can my money grow without me constantly having to like watch it and stuff. Yeah.
And how about things like, I just remember my nan being obsessed with premium bonds.
Oh yeah.
Like that was like a thing. She's like, another premium bond.
Yeah.
Is that still a thing?
Yes.
Are ISA still a thing? Like, is that still smart?
Yeah. Premium bonds are great. And of course you've got the NS&I that people can go on. I forget what it stands for, but you can invest in premium bonds that way. And there's like a lottery service, which essentially means that you invest a certain amount of money and then you have a chance of winning a little bit of extra to go towards it. But people still invest in premium bonds just for the sake of diversity. Like some people don't want to be like, oh, all my money's in one thing, so they spread it across different ways. And bonds are very risk averse assets in comparison to other things where your capital is always at risk when it comes to investing, but premium bonds are deemed as quite safe.
Right.
And that
okay.
you're getting your money back.
Okay.
Yeah.
If we're looking to save or invest, however that would look, when it comes to somebody's outgoings and knowing what portion you can save, because I think that's another thing too. Like, savings are well and good, as I said before. Like, if you're privileged enough to be able to get by, survive, do what you need to do every month, and you've got money left over to save, how should that look? Is there like if we're looking at kind of like a ratio of what we should be spending away and how we should be living in kind of like beyond our means, you know?
Yeah, so there's like a well-known budgeting rule, which is like 50, 30, 20,
right,
which is 50% on your needs, the things that you have to like put towards everyday expenses, mortgage, rent, whatever it is, and all the utilities that come with that, and 30% on your wants. You want to go out with your friends, whatever it is, and so on. And 20% is supposed to be on like savings and investments and stuff. So people always ask, how much should I be putting away?
Yeah.
And I say, roughly around 20%. However, if you can put away more because you're in a position to do so, do it.
Right.
But if not, try to hit that minimum, because it's so important that we all live beyond, live beneath our means.
Yes.
And I know that costs are going up in different places, so it does mean that you are having to change that buffer, but it is incredibly key that you actually have enough to save from time to time, as opposed to, oh, my money doesn't stretch that far enough, because when the future comes, the future's going to knock and it's like, hello, did you not take care of me? And you just want to make sure that you've actually been putting money away.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I've not heard that 50, 30, 20 rule before, because it's almost working backwards, isn't it? And we all kind of, like you say, the idea is not to live beyond your means, is to live beneath them.
Yeah.
And actually, if you look at your income, what you do with that 50% should slot into that, as in like what the outgoings are.
Yeah.
The house that you
God.
rent, that that that's how
Yeah.
it should figure itself out.
Yeah, and that 50% rule, even on your needs, is a great indication of where you're at and what you're spending on. That's where they've got this affordability kind of preference when it comes to homes and buying. They want to make sure that you can afford it, because back in the day, I think like 20 or 30 years ago, someone on like 30 or 40k could buy like a 1.5 million house, which is insane when you think about it, which is why they now have the multiplier of 4.5 times of your income.
Right.
So for example, if you're on 100k and you want a house that's 500k, then you can probably afford it after you pay the deposit for the house. And so that makes sense. Whereas back in the day, there wasn't a multiplier, so people could go wild. They were defaulting on their homes and losing their homes as a result. So it is key that you look at, okay, how much of my expenses come into that 50% of my income? If it comes over a little more, 55, 60%, fine. But if it's like 80%, that's worrying, because what about your wants? What about if you want to meet up with your friends or do things you love? And what about your savings?
Yeah. And then it comes to that kind of working yourself into the ground to achieve the musts.
Yeah.
But then also there's no want.
Exactly. Yeah. And I just think that's terrible. I always tell people, like, you just don't want to be miserable. Some people that, they come to me, they get into debt, and they're like, how about if I work 3 jobs? And I'm like, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah.
Like, look after your mental health. I always say that when it comes to money, like, please don't burn yourself into the ground to do this, or to maybe live a lifestyle if you feel like you won't have time for yourself.
Yeah. And mentally, money worries are the worst worry, right?
Yeah,
I think, we discuss that in like groups of friends or family. And, I've seen that over the years with my mum and myself, and obviously now my finances look a lot different and I'm very grateful for that, to how they once were. But that feeling of not making ends meet, the feeling of everything spiraling, and it all comes down to not being in an okay financial situation. Like when your worry is only money, but that is such a big worry, because not having it and not having the kind of ability to be able to support or to be able to do what you need to do, and knowing that you could have the rug pulled from under you at any moment, there's nothing that quite sort of touches your mental health like that. You know?
Yeah. And I agree on that sentiment of like how I grew up is different from how I'm living now. And I'm so grateful for that, because just kind of seeing my mum struggle and stuff like that, I always knew from growing up, I was like, cool, money's a really big thing. I remember being young.
It made me very aware.
Rushing to work, I said, oh, this workplace is really important.
Yes.
It's really important
exactly.
to people. And I was like, oh, okay, it's the money and stuff like that. So I've always been like, I need to be careful growing up, because this thing is quite serious, and I don't want money to control me. I don't think it should control anyone.
No. And it really does. And I think that, like you say, that's a worrying place to be in. When we talk about personal income and we talk about, I suppose, personal banking, personal finances, and we're breaking down the 50, 30, 20 rule. When it comes to business, does the same rule apply? Do the numbers change? How do you think that looks? Because obviously when you start, there's a lot to break down, whether that's budgeting for, you know, I run a product-based business, so I'm talking in product-based terms.
Yeah.
But whether that is for us, it would look like formulation, it would look like testing, it would look like product, it would look like packaging, PR, marketing, everything else to, you know, bring it to light. So when it comes to budgeting early days in a business, what do you think the rule is to follow?
I would actually say with that, just look at the difference between your needs and your wants.
So when I break down that list of things that are going to have to come out.
Yeah, you have to look at, okay, I have to do this to get the product out. So that's a need and so on. So that lets you know every single month this comes up to X figure. But then you may be working with a PR company, but then maybe there's another PR company that offers something different. What's the price then, and so on? So I'd always say, wherever possible, you want to get the best possible price and the best service, which is of course what we all want, right? We all want everything for like £1.
Yeah, that's the truth.
So I think it might not necessarily be 50, 30, 20, but I think the key message is the same in terms of what are your wants for the business and how different is that from a need, because it's very easy when a business is your baby to say, oh, we've got to have that.
It would be great to do this because this is going to make people go wild.
Exactly. But at the same time, could you live without that? And then just see. So it just depends on how much income you've got coming in and so on. But you all know that, you know, oh, look, we have to do testing. That's an absolute must.
That's a non-negotiable.
Exactly. And that's where the need is. First, a want could be like, oh, I've got this great idea and I've hired so-and-so person to do that and stuff. Or maybe a supplier says, oh, I can throw this in as an extra. And you think, oh, actually, that may sell well, but we have to choose between our needs and our wants and stuff like that. So that might not necessarily be 50% on your needs. It could be more, especially because it's a business. But yeah, I'd say that's where it differs a bit.
It's so interesting to hear the difference between saving and investing, because like you say, our default is like we should save, but actually, as you mentioned, making your money work harder for you rather than always having to kind of watch it and see what happens with it. I know that you're really passionate about, I mean, I'm really passionate about women, hence why this whole thing exists, but you're really passionate about women when it comes to investing, aren't you?
Yeah. First of all, I just think more women need their money. I'm so big on that. It's so important, and it's okay for women to want money as well. There's currently a gap. So men invest 567 billion more than women, which goes to show that there's still this huge gap and space for women to jump in and invest. And I'm not just talking about investing in one way, investing in different ways. Of course, you've got like stocks and shares, but as you said, Yonan does premium bonds and stuff like that, or investing in businesses, or even investing in yourself. Like, what women will add to the GDP of this country if they started their own businesses in comparison to men as well. It will put us in such a better position from an economic standpoint. And I just think, just wherever possible, I just tell women, please just get started. You don't need to have all the answers. Because one thing I noticed from a lot of the women I talk to, they will read all the books.
We've read every self-help book going.
Literally, we've read all the books. Here is our plan. They've got the PowerPoints, they've got the briefs and stuff like that. And they're like, do you think I'm good to go? And I'm like, you were good to go 5 steps ago.
Yeah. Do you know what's so funny is Emma Greed said this. And obviously this isn't like finance based, but she was like, when somebody comes to me to look to invest in them, they give me the PowerPoint, the shiny deck. It's got
Yeah.
bells and whistles on, and it looks amazing.
Yeah.
But she's like, just do it. The best sign of an entrepreneur is someone that takes that idea and just runs with it and says, I've been trying and this is where we've got so far.
Yeah.
That is way more appealing than the kind of PowerPoint presentation.
Exactly, because that's when you have a bottleneck that someone else can step in and help with.
Yes.
Even like I met with my friend and he has a fantastic business and I want to start something similar. And on my way to the meeting, I was just like, Bola, this is your last meeting about this business. I said, no more. It's actually enough. Just go and do something and start. Because I was like, I'm sick of you.
Yes,
I was like,
I'm sick of myself.
I was like, I'm sick of myself. Just go and start and see how it goes and you will get better. As opposed to this whole notion of everything has to be perfect, because everything we put on paper and in documents don't always turn out that way.
Yes.
Anyway, and the best lessons are the ones that you learn from starting and moving forward and being like, oh, I tried that, or you know, next time you can say, oh, be careful of that, and you know, that's how you build.
Which is so interesting, because when it comes to finances, to me it feels very like methodical and like you must do this because this gets X, but it's so kind of reassuring to know that you also do have to try and see what's for you and find out what sticks.
Yeah, that's what I did. Because even when I started like investing via like the stock market, I just remember I was like, oh, very new at this. When I got started, I was like, very new, I'm going to invest in this. And I learned different things about different times. And I was like, oh, I don't like this way of investing. So like investing in singular stocks are quite risky in comparison to investing in funds. And I was just like, I don't have time to track singular stocks and like check my phone.
Or time for risk.
Exactly. Check my phone and be like, oh my gosh, like my portfolio is down by so much because it's all dependent on this one company. So I think it's important as well to learn along the way. And that's how you learn about yourself in different seasons, as opposed to just thinking like, oh, I'm just going to follow this rule because that's the way to do it. Life doesn't work that way.
And when we talk about like, you know, there's a big difference between a finance expert and an accountant, right? Yeah. So when we talk about, you know, maybe sort of teeing up an accountant when, you know, you've been working at this for 6 to 9 months and now you've got a bit of a record and it's probably time to sort of seek advice and make space in the budget for that. When do you think is a good time to talk about somebody that actually helps you with your finances in terms of advice? And, you know, when should young founders be interested in investing? Like, because obviously it's hard.
Good question.
I know that we mentioned about saving and investment, and that's something you can do early on as opposed to saving. But when do you think it's time to look and say, because I think the most, in my mind, when I think about progression and earning and building, I kind of, you want to make sure everything's sorted personally. I don't really think of like, let's invest in this and which is probably not a great mindset to have, as you've just mentioned. But I think of, okay, and my friend has said this to me, so it'd be really interesting to get to your take on this. My friend said, you're worrying too much. I think the working class mentality in me will never leave. Like the fact that me and my mum was in a hostel, and then we went to a council house, and then it was like a lottery win the day that she bought the house from the council. So my mindset has always been, own your own house.
Yes.
Don't have a credit card. Only use a debit card, and you know, work hard to pay off a mortgage, or like, you know, make more down payments than you need to.
Yeah.
Because that has drilled into me to like own it, because no one then can ever take it away from you. But then when I talk to my friends that understand that and haven't sort of had probably the same upbringing as me, and are way more well educated in that, they're like, that's wrong. Why spend your money when you can spend a bank's? Or why spend? And they really challenge me on that. And I think that there's something mentally that I'm like, I just want to work hard till I have no mortgage. Like that is to me like the biggest life dream. And they're like, okay, well, if that's going to satisfy you mentally, that's one thing. But actually use a credit card. Why are you using your debit card? Like there's things that kind of that we really disagree on. What's your take on that?
Who we become, even like financially, is so dependent on our childhood and how we saw money growing up, and the decisions that we made and the habits that we formed. I think I get the paying off a mortgage being a dream, but I still think it's important as well to use other people's money where possible, because that's how, depending on how you feel about risk, you can grow and make more money. So some people, they don't just have one property. They're like, actually, if I have a few properties, then I can use this for my pension. I can use it for like my kids when they grow up and stuff. And some people are like, no, I just want to have one property. It really depends on how you see risk and what you're comfortable with.
And what your idea of success is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's so important to maybe push yourself into your why, because you want to make sure that once you hit that pinnacle of success, you don't feel stumped. You don't feel like, oh, is this it?
Yeah.
Like in some ways you were able to challenge yourself. But yeah, I mean, I get where your friends are coming from, because sometimes I do that. I have to push myself and I'm like, really? I'm a bit scared.
Yeah. And like, look, even the idea of having a credit card terrified me until a couple of years ago.
Yeah, a lot of people have that actually. A lot of people.
My mum was like, they are bad. I think she just, when I was younger, thought that I would get a credit card and just completely blow it, which I did at one point. And then not, and then that becomes debt that's negative, where actually it can be debt that's positive. Exactly. And I think it's changed our mindset. Like, not all debt is negative. Bad. The word debt just terrifies me. Yeah. But it actually isn't, it doesn't have to be a negative, does it?
Yeah, there's good debt and there's bad debt. So I think like running up a credit card and not having the means to like pay it back, and then kind of having this huge balance, meaning that you are incurring interest, is bad debt. But for me, good debt is, I don't know, like a student loan. Like I got a student loan, and that to me is good debt because I studied maths and finance. I'm still in finance today. So that to me is an example of good debt. When it comes to credit cards, you just have to have financial discipline. So when people say to me, should I get a credit card? I ask them, do you have financial discipline to have it? Because everything can't be an emergency and stuff like that. Like, you can't say, oh, I've got to do this. Or I hear, oh, I've got to get the kids presents. I've got to do this. And I'm like, do you really have to? And especially if you don't have the means to like maybe pay it back, and now you're paying more for the presents because you just felt kind of that you had to.
So when it comes to like a credit card, for argument's sake, it's bad debt when you're putting something on the credit card that you can't pay straight away, but you should use the credit card if you can.
Yes, yeah, use it and build up your credit, because it also shows your discipline and shows that you're trustworthy on the basis that you are paying it back, and you will see your score go up on that basis. But if it's like you have a credit card and it's got a £10,000 limit and you use up 8,000 of it, then it looks as if to say that you're a bit too dependent on that, so that can bring your score down. But if you use, let's say 30% or less, so that's maybe 2 to 3k, it looks like, okay, you use it from time to time and you know how to manage it well.
But then say you use it and your limit is £5,000, you've used £2,000 of that credit card, you have the means to pay the £2,000 off.
Yeah.
Should the preference always be spending it on the credit card versus the debit card?
I think it depends on what you're getting. So with a credit card, you've got the like Credit Consumer Act, which means anything that you buy which is over £100, you are essentially covered by that thing. So for example, if you were to take a flight somewhere and you booked it on your credit card, and then maybe the airline goes bust and stuff like that, your credit card can help you recoup that money.
Which you couldn't on a debit card.
Correct.
Right.
And I know this because this has happened to me. I literally flew for my sister's wedding and they had no flights back. And I booked it on my debit card and I left my credit card at home, and I was so angry because I knew this. But
see, even the experts get it wrong.
Honestly, it's so important. They say that literally. And I was like, Bola, what are you doing? And I had to tell my brother, and he's the oldest and he's an accountant. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know, but please help me.
I've got to get my messaging here.
Literally.
Okay, so for that layer of protection, but then also for credit score, and if you're seen to use it and constantly
do well with it. So if you're managing your money well, then what it means is that the next time you want to apply for something on credit, they're like, okay, great, we can trust you. Whereas some people, if they abuse it and so on, I know, so I've seen public stories of maybe influencers who've made a lot of money, and then you think the next step is for them to buy a house, and some of them have come out and said, I was really bad with credit, I have the money, I don't have the credit, so they don't trust me to pay off the mortgage and stuff like that. So now I have to rent for another 2 years and stuff like that. So it's so important.
So that's so interesting. Actually.
I always say that if like cash is king, credit is queen. Like, you just like don't play with credit. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I ask every guest, whether that's on the launch box or whether that is, our episodes weekly, to leave a tip something tangible that our listener can take and do today and make action today. So if a lady's listening that wants to start a business from a financial perspective, what do you think is something that they could do to sort of put that into play today?
Yeah, I would say in your business plan, have an idea and have a forecast of your business in year 0, year 5 and year 10. I think that those are kind of key markers, and it allows you breathing space to let your business grow and to see what type of numbers you're trying to hit in those different years, because it also gives you time and allowance to get to that point and maybe look at marketing strategies, for example, of how you're going to get there. Because comparing year on year, it's next to each other, so sometimes it might not be as much as you thought, but if you give it that space and that time, you're able to maybe change your business plan slightly or tweak a few things to be like, this is how we jumped and got to that next figure,
and this is how we grow.
Exactly. And just know that, you know, also ask yourself, I always say as well, maybe ask yourself, what's your number, which can change. Like if somebody came and said, hey, I want to buy your business, what's your number? That would make you say, okay, this is what I'd sell it for, and so on.
Okay, so it's almost being, when you're starting, it's almost, as well as the business launching and that be exciting, you've almost got to think about the future at the start.
Yeah, exactly, because even the like accounting records you keep and so on, if anyone comes into your business, whether that's as a partner or an investor, they're going to want to see that and see how everything's run. So also kind of think about staying organized.
Okay, well there we go. I feel like I've got a lot of organising stuff today. I'm with myself on my own messaging that next year everything's going to be smoother when it comes to tax return.
It will. We're all trying to get better with that. It's all a work in progress.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks for having
me.
me.
So much.
Thank you.
Don't forget to follow us on Apple and Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts to make sure you don't miss out, because next week we're going to be talking to another incredible lady who launched. If, like me, you're a watcher, then follow us on YouTube, and please don't forget to like and subscribe.